The whiskey burned Rose Carrington's throat as she gulped it down, feeling the stares of every man in the saloon boring into her back. It was 1876 in Bitter Creek, Wyoming territory, and a woman drinking alone might as well have painted a target on her back. But Rose didn't care anymore. Not after what happened last night. "Easy there, madam," the bartender said, his voice low. "That's strong stuff." Rose placed the empty glass on the counter with a thud. "So am I." The lie felt good on her lips, even if the truth was buried somewhere beneath the humiliation and fury. 3 days ago, she'd been a respectable married woman. Now she was property, traded away like a sack of flour by the man who had promised to cherish her until death. The saloon doors swung open, letting in a blast of autumn air along with a tall figure whose shadow stretched across the sawdust-covered floor. Nicholas Ryder was not a man who needed to announce himself. His presence did that well enough. The room quieted as he made his way to the bar, spurs jingling with each deliberate step. Rose stiffened but didn't turn around. She'd heard enough about the infamous Cowboy to recognize him without looking. Nicholas Ryder, cattle driver and occasional bounty hunter, a man who'd survived 3 gunfights and reportedly once tracked an outlaw across 2 territories in the dead of winter. "Miss Carrington," he said, taking the stool beside her. His voice was deeper than she'd expected, like stones tumbling down a hillside. "Mrs. Holloway," she corrected automatically, then winced. "Though I suppose that's not true anymore." Nicholas ordered a whiskey but didn't touch it when it arrived. Word travels fast in Bitter Creek. "I heard what Thomas Holloway did." Rose's fingers tightened around her empty glass. "Then you'll forgive me if I'm not in the mood for conversation, Mr. Ryder." "That's fair." He nodded, his expression unreadable beneath the shadow of his hat brim. "But there's something you should know. I was at that poker game last night." The world seemed to stop. Rose finally turned to look at him fully. Nicholas Ryder wasn't handsome in the conventional way of city men. His face was weathered by sun and wind, a thin scar tracing from his right temple to his cheekbone. But his eyes were startlingly clear, the color of a summer sky. "You were there," Rose whispered, her voice threatening to crack, "when my husband bet me like I was nothing." Nicholas met her gaze steadily. "I was, and I won." Rose felt as if the floor had dropped from beneath her. So this was it. This stranger owned her now, by the twisted rules of men and cards. She'd heard stories of women in the territories being wagered and won, but never imagined she'd join their ranks. "I see." She straightened her back, summoning what dignity remained. "And have you come to collect your property?" Something flickered across Nicholas's face, anger perhaps, though not directed at her. "No, madam, I've come to give you this." He placed a folded document on the bar between them. "It's a deed to a small parcel of land just outside town. It's yours now, free and clear." Rose stared at the paper, uncomprehending. "I don't understand." "I didn't win you, Mrs. Holloway. I won the right to free you." His voice was quiet but firm. "No person should ever be another's property. What your husband did was unconscionable." Her hands trembled as she reached for the document. "Why would you do this for a stranger?" Nicholas finally picked up his whiskey, though he only swirled it thoughtfully. "My mother was wagered away by my father when I was 10 years old. A man named Jeffrey Blackburn won her." His jaw tightened. "He wasn't as considerate as I aimed to be." Rose unfolded the deed with shaking fingers. It was legitimate as far as she could tell. Her name was written in careful script. "This land. I can't accept this. It's too much. It's not charity if that's what concerns you. It's reparation for a wrong I witnessed and could prevent." He set his still full glass down. "There's a small cabin on the property. It needs work, but it's solid. You'd have a roof over your head while you decide what comes next." "What comes next?" Rose repeated, the words foreign on her tongue. For 5 years, her life had been defined by Thomas Holloway's wants and needs. The possibility of choosing her own path seemed both terrifying and exhilarating. The stage to Denver leaves tomorrow morning if you'd prefer to leave Bitter Creek behind, Nicholas continued. I'd understand that choice, but if you stay, that land is yours. Rose carefully refolded the deed. And what do you expect in return, Mr. Ryder? His eyes met hers, unflinching. Nothing, not a single thing. She'd learned the hard way that men always wanted something. I find that difficult to believe. I reckon you have every reason for caution. Nicholas stood, leaving his whiskey untouched. The deed is yours regardless of what you decide. I'll be moving cattle to the north pasture for the next week. After that, if you're still in Bitter Creek and want help repairing that cabin, you can find me at the Lazy R Ranch. He touched the brim of his hat in a respectful gesture and turned to leave. Mr. Ryder, Rose called after him, causing him to pause. Thank you. Nicholas nodded once, then pushed through the saloon doors and disappeared into the Wyoming evening. The following morning, Rose stood at the stagecoach depot, her small carpet bag containing everything she still possessed in the world. The Denver-bound stage was being loaded, passengers climbing aboard as the driver secured luggage. Last call for Denver, the stagecoach manager bellowed. Rose clutched her ticket, purchased with the last of the money she'd secretly saved from her household allowance over the years. Denver represented safety. She had a cousin there who might take her in until she found work. You heading out, Mrs. Holloway? The question came from Sheriff Miller, a decent man who'd always treated Rose with respect. Yes, she answered, then hesitated. Actually, it's just Miss Carrington now. The sheriff's weathered face registered understanding. Word gets around. I'm sorry about what happened. Thomas Holloway never was worth much in my estimation. Rose managed a small smile. I'm beginning to see that myself. Where will you go? She looked down at the ticket in her hand, then reached into her pocket where the deed to the small cabin rested. I'm not certain anymore. The stagecoach driver called the final boarding. Rose stood frozen, torn between the safety of Denver and the uncertain promise of independence the deed represented. Interesting fellow, that Nicholas Ryder, Sheriff Miller remarked casually. Known him going on 5 years now. Never known him to break his word or take advantage of someone in need. The driver was climbing onto his seat, preparing to depart. Sheriff, Rose said suddenly, what do you know about raising chickens? Miller's eyebrows rose. Chickens? Well, they're not too difficult. Good for eggs and meat. Don't need much space. Rose took a deep breath and handed her ticket back to the stunned depot manager. I believe I'll be staying in Bitter Creek after all. The cabin was indeed small, but Nicholas hadn't exaggerated about its solidity. Built of sturdy pine logs, it stood in a clearing surrounded by cottonwood trees. The roof needed patching and the single window was cracked, but it was more than Rose had dared hope for. The inside consisted of a single room with a stone fireplace. A rickety table, 2 chairs, and an iron bedstead with a straw-filled mattress constituted the entirety of the furnishings. It was humble, but it was hers, the first thing she'd ever truly owned. For 3 days, Rose worked from dawn until dusk, cleaning years of dust and debris from the cabin. She scrubbed the plank floor until her knuckles bled, washed the single window until it sparkled despite its crack, and gathered firewood from the surrounding trees. On the 4th day, a wagon approached as she was attempting to patch the roof. Rose climbed down the makeshift ladder, wiping her hands on her apron as Nettie Barnes, the shopkeeper's wife, pulled her wagon to a stop. Thought you might need some provisions, Nettie called, her round face kind beneath her bonnet. Got some beans, flour, coffee, and such. Sheriff Miller mentioned you decided to stay. Rose blinked back unexpected tears at the simple kindness. That's very thoughtful, Mrs. Barnes. It's Nettie, dear, and it's no trouble. The older woman climbed down from the wagon. Besides, I brought something else you might appreciate more than beans. From the back of the wagon, Nettie produced a wooden crate. Inside were 3 hens, clucking indignantly at their confinement. "Chickens!" Rose exclaimed, a genuine smile spreading across her face. "Every homestead needs chickens," Nettie declared. "These 3 are good layers. The speckled one's a bit ornery, but she makes up for it with double yolks." Over the next hour, Nettie helped Rose construct a simple chicken coop from scrap lumber that had been stacked behind the cabin. As they worked, Nettie shared the local gossip, including news that Thomas Holloway had left Bitter Creek 2 days prior, reportedly headed for California after losing the remainder of his money in another poker game. "Good riddance to bad rubbish," Nettie pronounced, hammering a nail with surprising force for a woman her age. "Never did like that man. Too smooth by half and mean when the whiskey was in him." Rose remained quiet. The bruises on her arms had faded, but the memory of Thomas's temper remained fresh. "Now Nicholas Ryder," Nettie continued, giving Rose a sidelong glance. "There's a man cut from different cloth entirely." "I hardly know him," Rose replied carefully. "Known him since he first came to these parts 6 years back. Worked his way up from nothing to owning the Lazy R." Nettie paused in her hammering. "Lost his wife in childbirth before he came here. The baby, too." Some men would have turned bitter, but Nicholas just grew quieter, more determined to do right by folks. Rose absorbed this information, fitting it against her brief impression of the taciturn cowboy. "He seems honorable." "That he is." Nettie nodded decisively. "And easy on the eyes, too, if you don't mind my saying so." Rose felt her cheeks warm. "Mrs. Barnes, just stating facts, dear," Nettie chuckled. "Now let's finish this coop before these hens decide to roost in your bed instead." A week passed, then another. Rose settled into a routine, finding unexpected satisfaction in the simple tasks of maintaining her small homestead. Each morning, she collected eggs and tended to a small vegetable garden she'd started with seeds Nettie had provided. In the afternoons, she worked on repairs to the cabin, learning through trial and error. True to his word, Nicholas Ryder had not appeared, though Rose occasionally found herself scanning the horizon, wondering when he might return from moving his cattle. She told herself it was merely practical. The roof still needed proper patching, and the well required a new bucket, tasks better suited to someone with more strength and experience than she possessed. On the morning marking 2 weeks since she'd claimed the cabin, Rose was struggling to split firewood when the sound of hoofbeats made her look up. Nicholas Ryder approached on a chestnut gelding, leading a pack horse laden with supplies. "Miss Carrington," he called, dismounting with easy grace. "I see you decided to stay." Rose set down the axe, suddenly conscious of her disheveled appearance. Her hair had come loose from its pins and her dress was patched and dusty. "Mr. Ryder," she acknowledged. "Yes, I found I wasn't ready to leave after all." Nicholas surveyed the improvements she'd made: the newly weeded pathway, the chicken coop, the garden beginning to sprout. "You've been busy." There was much to do. Rose straightened her shoulders, oddly eager for his approval. "Though I confess, some tasks have proven beyond my abilities." Nicholas nodded, understanding. "That roof needs proper attention before winter sets in. Are you offering your assistance, Mr. Ryder, if you'll accept it?" His expression remained neutral, but Rose thought she detected a hint of uncertainty in his eyes. "I've brought some supplies: roofing nails, tar paper, hinges for a proper door. Notice the existing one was hanging by a thread when I was here last." Rose hesitated. The idea of a man working on her property, of being indebted again, made her uneasy. But the practical reality was that she couldn't complete these repairs alone. "I can pay you," she offered, though her funds were dangerously low. Nicholas removed his hat, revealing sun-bleached brown hair. "No need. Consider it neighborly duty." "Neighbors help each other," Rose said carefully. "So perhaps while you work on the roof, I could provide meals. I make a decent venison stew when I can get venison." Something like a smile ghosted across Nicholas's face. "As it happens, I brought a haunch of deer meat, seemed ashamed to let it go to waste, and so their arrangement began." Nicholas arrived each morning after tending to his ranch duties, working steadily on the cabin repairs until late afternoon. Rose cooked meals and continued her own tasks, maintaining a careful distance that gradually relaxed as days passed. They spoke little at first, but silence between them was surprisingly comfortable. Occasionally, Nicholas would offer instructions or request a tool, his manner always respectful, never presuming. Rose found herself studying him when he wasn't looking, the methodical way he worked, the gentleness with which he treated her hens when they pecked curiously around his boots. On the fourth day, as they shared a midday meal of corn, bread, and beans, Nicholas broke their comfortable silence. "You're doing well here. Not everyone could manage what you have." Rose looked up, surprised by the compliment. "Necessity is a powerful motivator, Mr. Ryder." "Nicholas," he corrected quietly. "If we're to be neighbors, perhaps we could dispense with formalities." She considered this, then nodded. "Nicholas, then, and you may call me Rose." He tested her name, the single syllable sounding different in his deep voice. "Rose, it suits you." "My mother loved gardens," she explained, feeling oddly compelled to share something of herself. "We had roses climbing every available surface of our home in Missouri." "You miss it there?" Nicholas asked, breaking off a piece of corn bread. "I miss what it was," Rose admitted. "After my parents died of fever, the house went to my uncle. He made it clear I wasn't welcome to stay unless I married quickly." Her mouth twisted. "Thomas Holloway was passing through, looking for a wife to bring west. He seemed kind then." Nicholas's jaw tightened, but his voice remained even. "Men often show their true nature after the vows are spoken." "Yes." Rose stared into her coffee. 5 years I was his wife, 5 years of—" She trailed off, unwilling to enumerate the humiliations and disappointments. "You don't have to speak of it," Nicholas assured her. "No, but perhaps I should. I've held these thoughts inside so long." Rose took a steadying breath. "Thomas wanted a servant more than a wife, someone to cook and clean and warm his bed when he desired it. When I failed to conceive a child after 2 years, he grew resentful, started drinking more, staying out later." Nicholas remained silent, but his attention was absolute. The night he wagered me, it wasn't the first time he'd suggested such a thing. Rose's voice grew quieter. "He'd threatened it before when drunk, but I never believed he would actually do it. I should have known better." "The failing was his, not yours," Nicholas said firmly. "No honorable man would treat his wife, would treat anyone as property to be traded." Rose studied him, wondering at the intensity in his voice. "You mentioned your mother was treated similarly." Nicholas set down his coffee mug, his expression darkening. "She was. My father was a gambler and a drunk. Lost everything we had, piece by piece, until all that remained was our homestead and my mother. He wagered both in a single hand of cards." "What happened to her?" Rose asked gently. "Jeffrey Blackburn won the hand. He took the deed to our land and my mother both." Nicholas's knuckles whitened as he gripped the mug. "I was sent to live with my father's brother. 3 months later, word came that my mother had died fallen downstairs, they claimed. I never believed it." "I'm so sorry," Rose whispered. Nicholas seemed to emerge from the grip of his memories, his features softening as he looked at her. "It was a long time ago, but it taught me something I've never forgotten. A person's worth isn't measured by another's valuation." "Your husband didn't determine your value, Rose. No one can but you." Their gazes held for a long moment, something unspoken passing between them. Rose felt a fluttering sensation in her chest that had nothing to do with fear or anxiety feelings that had dominated her life for so long. This was something different, something she barely remembered. Hope. The remainder of their meal passed in thoughtful silence, but the air between them had shifted, becoming charged with possibility. As autumn deepened, the cabin transformed. Under Nicholas's skilled hands, the roof was properly patched, the door replaced, and the cracked window repaired. Rose, meanwhile, had created a home from the bare shelter. She'd sewn curtains from flour sacks, constructed a braided rug from scraps, and arranged wildflowers in tin cans on the small table. Their working arrangement had evolved into a friendship, unlike any Rose had known. Nicholas brought news from town along with occasional supplies. Rose shared the fruits of her garden and the increasing bounty of eggs her chickens produced. They exchanged stories Nicholas of his cattle drives and adventures throughout the territories, Rose of her childhood in Missouri and her dreams of someday seeing the ocean. One crisp October afternoon, Nicholas arrived with an unexpected addition to his usual packhorse load, a rocking chair, lovingly crafted of smooth pine. "What's this?" Rose asked as he unloaded it from the horse. "Thought you might like somewhere comfortable to sit in the evenings," Nicholas replied, looking uncharacteristically self-conscious. "Made it myself over the past week." Rose ran her hand over the polished wood, admiring the careful craftsmanship. "It's beautiful. But I can't accept something so valuable." "You can," Nicholas insisted gently. "Besides, it's as much a gift for me as for you. Can't have you falling asleep at the table while I'm telling my stories." His eyes crinkled at the corners, a rare full smile transforming his weathered face. Rose laughed, a sound that had become more frequent in recent weeks. "Very well, but only if you'll join me for dinner tonight. I've made apple pie with the fruit Mrs. Peterson brought yesterday." Nicholas placed the rocking chair on the small porch they'd built together. An offer no sane man would refuse. That evening, as they sat before the fire sharing slices of pie, Rose felt a contentment she'd never known in her married years. Nicholas was telling her about his first cattle drive, his deep voice rising and falling with the rhythm of the tale when a pounding at the door startled them both. Nicholas was on his feet instantly, hand moving to the pistol at his hip. "Were you expecting anyone?" Rose shook her head, a knot of dread forming in her stomach. Few people visited her cabin and none would come so late without good reason. The pounding came again, followed by a slurred shout. "Rose, open this goddamn door." The blood drained from Rose's face. "Thomas." Nicholas's expression hardened. "Stay back," he instructed quietly, moving toward the door. Before he could reach it, the door burst open, revealing Thomas Holloway, unshaven and reeking of whiskey. He staggered into the cabin, his bloodshot eyes taking in the scene before him. "Well, well," Thomas sneered. "Didn't take you long to find another man's bed, did it, wife?" Rose stood, anger displacing her initial fear. "I am not your wife anymore, Thomas. You made that abundantly clear when you wagered me in a poker game." Thomas's gaze shifted to Nicholas. "Ryder. Should have known you'd help yourself to my leavings." "You're drunk, Holloway," Nicholas replied evenly, "and trespassing on Miss Carrington's property. I suggest you leave before you do something you'll regret." Thomas laughed, an ugly sound. "Her property? This is my wife, my property. Whatever little game you two have been playing ends now." He took an unsteady step toward Rose. "Get your things. You're coming with me." Nicholas moved between them. "She's not going anywhere with you." Thomas's hand dropped to his holster. "This isn't your business, Ryder." "I'm making it my business." Nicholas's voice was calm, but Rose could see the tension in his shoulders. "You gave up any claim to Rose when you put her in that poker pot. Now I'm asking you politely to leave." For a moment, the only sound was the crackling of the fire. Then Thomas lunged forward, drawing his pistol in a clumsy movement. Before he could raise it, Nicholas had disarmed him with a swift, practiced motion, sending the weapon skittering across the floor. Thomas howled in rage, throwing a wild punch that Nicholas easily dodged. The momentum carried Thomas forward, and he crashed into the table, sending plates and the remainder of the pie to the floor. "That's enough," Rose cried, retrieving Thomas's fallen pistol and pointing it at her former husband with shaking hands. "Get out of my home, Thomas. Now." Thomas stared at her, momentary shock giving way to bitter laughter. "You wouldn't dare pull that trigger." "Perhaps not," Rose acknowledged, steadying her aim. "But I would certainly consider it the most worthwhile thing I'd done in 5 years of marriage to you." Something in her voice, a steel that had never been present during their marriage, seemed to penetrate Thomas's alcohol-fogged mind. He straightened, wiping blood from his split lip. "This isn't over," he snarled. "I'm going to the sheriff." "We'll see what the law has to say about a wife abandoning her husband." "Former wife," Nicholas corrected. "And Sheriff Miller is well aware of how that marriage ended. I don't think you'll find much sympathy there." Thomas glared at them both, swaying slightly. "You think you're better than me, Ryder, playing the gentleman with another man's wife. We both know what you're really after." He spat on the floor. "She wasn't even worth the whiskey I lost that night." Nicholas's control, maintained until now, finally slipped. He grabbed Thomas by the collar, marching him forcibly to the door. "I won't hear you speak of her that way. Get on your horse and ride back to town. If I see you near this property again, our next conversation won't be so civil." He shoved Thomas onto the porch. Thomas stumbled, nearly falling down the steps before regaining his balance. "This isn't over," he repeated, but the threat sounded hollow now. "It is over," Nicholas replied firmly. "It was over the moment you decided cards and whiskey were worth more than the woman who shared your name. Now go." Thomas stood a moment longer, swaying in the moonlight, before turning and staggering toward his horse tethered nearby. They watched as he mounted clumsily and rode away, weaving slightly in the saddle. Rose lowered the pistol, suddenly aware that she was trembling. "I'm sorry about your pie," she said inanely, looking at the mess on the floor. Nicholas turned to her, concern evident in his features. "Are you all right?" The simple question, asked with genuine care, broke something loose inside Rose. Tears she'd held back for years spilled down her cheeks. "I was afraid," she admitted. Not of him exactly, but of feeling that way again, trapped, powerless. Nicholas hesitated, then tentatively placed his hands on her shoulders. "You're not powerless, Rose. You stood your ground, you protected your home." "Our home," she corrected, then flushed at the implication of her words. "I mean, this place is as much your creation as mine now." Nicholas's expression softened. "I've been happy to help, happier than I've been in a long time, truth be told." Rose looked up at him, suddenly aware of how close they stood, of the warmth of his hands through the fabric of her dress. "Nicholas!" A loud banging from outside interrupted the moment. They both tensed, thinking Thomas had returned, but the sound came again, a rhythmic clattering from the chicken coop. Nicholas released her shoulders and reached for his hat. "I'd better check on your hens. Could be a fox." The interruption broke the tension, allowing Rose to collect herself as Nicholas stepped outside. She busied herself cleaning up the fallen pie and broken dishes, her mind whirling with confused emotions. By the time Nicholas returned, reporting that a raccoon had been attempting to raid the chicken coop, Rose had restored order to the cabin. The intimate moment between them had passed, but something had shifted irrevocably. The careful boundary of friendship they'd maintained had been tested, revealing deeper currents beneath. "It's late," Nicholas said, retrieving his coat. "I should head back to the ranch." Rose nodded, though part of her wished he would stay not for protection against Thomas's possible return, but simply for the comfort of his presence. "Will you come tomorrow?" she asked. Nicholas paused at the door. "Do you want me to?" The question was weighted with meaning beyond the simple words. Rose met his gaze steadily. "Yes, I'd like that very much." A slow smile spread across Nicholas's face, genuine and unguarded. "Then I'll be here." As she watched him ride away, Rose sat in her new rocking chair, pushing gently back and forth as she considered the evening's events. Thomas's reappearance had been jarring, but it had clarified something important. The woman she had been during her marriage, submissive, fearful, diminished, was gone. In her place stood someone new, someone who was building a life on her own terms. And perhaps, she acknowledged with a flutter of anticipation, someone who was ready to open her heart again. The following weeks brought the first hints of winter to Bitter Creek. Frost rimmed the edges of Rose's garden in the mornings, and the cottonwood trees surrounding her cabin dropped their golden leaves in cascades that carpeted the ground. Word spread quickly about Thomas Holloway's confrontation at Rose's cabin. Most townsfolk took Rose's side, particularly after Sheriff Miller made it clear that, in his view, Thomas had legally forfeited any claim to Rose when he wagered her in the poker game. Thomas lingered in town for several more days, drinking heavily and making threats, until he was finally arrested for starting a brawl at the saloon. Upon his release, he departed on the next stage, reportedly bound for California as originally planned. Rose's relief at his departure was profound. Though she had stood her ground that night, Thomas's presence had stirred old fears she'd thought conquered. It took several days before she stopped startling at unexpected sounds or glancing nervously down the path whenever she worked outside. Throughout this unsettled time, Nicholas was a steady presence. He continued to visit daily, helping with final preparations for winter, stacking firewood, insulating the cabin with mud and straw in the cracks between logs, building a proper smokehouse for preserving meat. Their easy companionship deepened, though neither spoke directly about the moment of connection interrupted by the raccoon's invasion of the chicken coop. On a particularly cold November morning, Rose was kneading bread dough when a knock at the door announced Nicholas's arrival. She wiped flour from her hands and opened the door, surprised to find him dressed in his best clothes, a clean black coat over a white shirt, his usual worn hat replaced by a newer one. "Good morning," she greeted him, unable to keep a note of curiosity from her voice. "You're looking rather formal today." Nicholas shifted his weight, appearing uncharacteristically nervous. "Thought I might escort you to town if you're amenable. Sunday service is starting in an hour." Rose blinked in surprise. They'd never attended church together, though she occasionally went alone. "I'd like that," she said cautiously. "Is there a special occasion? Just thought it might be nice." Nicholas glanced at her flour-covered apron. "I can wait while you change if you'd like to go." Rose nodded, suddenly understanding. This was different from their usual interactions. This was Nicholas asking to be seen with her publicly, in a formal setting. It was, in the language of the frontier, a declaration of intent. "Give me a few minutes," she said, a smile playing at her lips. She changed quickly into her best dress, a deep blue cotton with modest lace at the collar. It was one of the few items she'd brought from her previous life with Thomas. but she'd altered it significantly, removing the restrictive boning in the bodice that Thomas had insisted upon and adding pockets that she found practical. When she emerged, Nicholas's appreciative gaze made her cheeks warm. He offered his arm with old-fashioned courtesy, and together they rode to town, Rose perched side-saddle on her mare beside Nicholas's gelding. Their entrance into the small Bitter Creek church caused a stir of whispers and knowing glances. Rose felt self-conscious until Nettie Barnes bustled over, welcoming them warmly and insisting they sit with her and her husband in their pew. Throughout the service, Rose was acutely aware of Nicholas beside her, his deep voice joining in the hymns, his shoulder occasionally brushing hers. When the collection plate passed, he placed a generous donation inside, his casual gesture speaking of financial security she'd never experienced with Thomas, who had always kept their precarious finances hidden from her. After the service, they lingered outside the church, accepting congratulations from townsfolk who clearly assumed their relationship was more established than it actually was. Rose found she didn't mind the misunderstanding. "Miss Carrington," Sheriff Miller approached, tipping his hat. "Good to see you in town. You too, Ryder." "Sheriff," Nicholas acknowledged. "Any word on Holloway? Last I heard, he boarded a westbound train in Cheyenne." Miller's weathered face creased in a smile. "Don't expect we'll be seeing him back in these parts." Rose felt a final knot of tension release at this news. "That's good to hear." "Indeed it is," the sheriff agreed. "By the way, Judge Parker will be making his circuit through here next week. Might be a good time to officially file those divorce papers, make everything nice and legal." Rose hadn't considered this aspect of her situation. Though Thomas had effectively ended their marriage through his actions, she realized a formal divorce would provide final closure and freedom to consider a future that increasingly included Nicholas in her thoughts. "Thank you, Sheriff. I'll keep that in mind." As they rode back to Rose's cabin, the air between them hummed with unspoken possibility. Nicholas was quieter than usual, seemingly lost in thought. "Penny for your thoughts," Rose prompted as they approached her property. Nicholas smiled slightly. "Not sure they're worth that much. I'll be the judge of that." He guided his horse closer to hers. "I was thinking about how different things might have been if I hadn't been at that poker game that night." "I've wondered that myself," Rose admitted. "What made you join that particular game?" "You don't strike me as a gambling man." "I'm not, generally," Nicholas replied. "But I'd heard rumors about Holloway's behavior, how he treated you. When I saw him in the saloon that night, already deep in his cups and boasting about what he might wager, I decided to keep an eye on the situation." Rose felt a chill at the calculation in Thomas's actions. "You knew what he was planning." "Not specifically," Nicholas clarified. "But I've seen men like him before, men who view women as possessions. When he ran out of money and insisted on continuing the game, I had a bad feeling about what might come next." "So you stayed in the game deliberately?" Rose asked, touched by his concern for a woman he hadn't even known at the time. "I did. And when he wagered you, I made sure I won." Nicholas's expression darkened. "The other men at the table were not. Gentlemen, I couldn't bear to think of you at their mercy." They reached Rose's cabin and dismounted. Nicholas took the reins of both horses, tethering them to the hitching post he'd installed by the porch. "You're a good man, Nicholas Ryder," Rose said softly. "Better than I deserve to find after Thomas." Nicholas turned to her, his blue eyes intense. "You deserve far more than I could ever offer, Rose, but I'd like the chance to try." Her heart quickened. "What are you saying?" Nicholas took a deep breath. "I'm saying that these past weeks, helping you build this place, sharing meals and conversation, they've been the happiest of my life since I lost Sarah." "Sarah was your wife?" Rose asked gently. He nodded. 6 years ago, the fever took her and our unborn child. For a long time after, I didn't think I'd ever want to risk that kind of loss again. What changed? You. Nicholas took a step closer. Your courage, your determination, the way you've rebuilt your life from nothing. You make me want to risk my heart again, Rose. Rose felt tears prick her eyes, but they were tears of joy, not sorrow. I was so afraid after Thomas, she confessed. Not just of him, but of trusting any man again. You've shown me that not all men are like him, that there can be kindness and respect between a man and a woman. Is that all you want? Nicholas asked quietly. Kindness and respect, Rose smiled, reaching out to touch his cheek. No, I want more. Much more. Nicholas covered her hand with his own, turning to press a kiss against her palm. I love you, Rose Carrington. I think I started falling the moment I saw you standing up to Holloway in your cabin, holding that pistol steady despite your fear. I love you too, Rose whispered, the words both terrifying and liberating. I think I've known it since you brought me that rocking chair. Nicholas laughed, the sound rich with joy. If I'd known woodworking was the way to your heart, I'd have built you a whole house full of furniture weeks ago. Rose joined in his laughter, feeling lighter than she had in years. The chair was lovely, but it wasn't the gift itself, it was that you thought about my comfort, what would make my life better. No one had done that for me in a very long time. Nicholas drew her into his arms, his embrace gentle but secure. I want to spend the rest of my life thinking about what would make you happy, Rose, if you'll let me. Rose looked up at him, at this man who had offered her freedom without expectation and love without demands. Are you asking what I think you're asking, Nicholas Ryder? I am. He smiled down at her. Not today, perhaps. You deserve time to be truly free first, to know your own mind without any man's influence. But when Judge Parker comes through next week, and you've settled matters with Holloway legally, if you still feel the same then, I'd be honored if you'd consider becoming my wife. Rose felt a moment's hesitation at the word wife. It had represented such confinement in her past. But she knew instinctively that marriage to Nicholas would be a partnership, not a prison. I don't need to wait for Judge Parker to know my heart, she told him. But you're right, doing things properly matters. So yes, Nicholas, when I'm legally free, I would be proud to become your wife. Nicholas's smile was radiant as he lowered his head to hers. Their first kiss was gentle, a promise of tenderness to come. When they parted, Rose felt a sense of rightness settle over her, as if pieces of a scattered puzzle had finally found their proper places. Will you come inside? She invited. I still have bread dough rising. Nicholas chuckled. I can think of no better way to spend a Sunday afternoon than watching you bake bread. Hand in hand, they walked into the cabin, her cabin, soon to be their cabin, at least until they decided where their future home would be. As Rose returned to her kneading and Nicholas built up the fire, the domestic simplicity of the moment struck her as miraculous, this peaceful togetherness that had emerged from the chaos of a poker game where she had been nothing more than a desperate man's stake. 1 week later, Judge Parker arrived in Bitter Creek as scheduled. The territorial judge was a formidable figure, known for his strict interpretation of the law and his fair-minded approach to the complexities of frontier justice. Rose appeared before him in the town's makeshift courthouse, nervously presenting her petition for divorce. To her relief, Judge Parker was sympathetic to her situation. With Sheriff Miller's testimony regarding Thomas's conduct and Nicholas's formal statement about the poker game, the judge ruled decisively in Rose's favor, granting the divorce on grounds of abandonment and cruel treatment. The law recognizes that marriage is a sacred bond, Judge Parker pronounced, his voice carrying through the crowded courtroom. but it also acknowledges that when that bond is broken by one party's dishonorable actions, the innocent party deserves release. Let the record show that Rose Holloway, now returned to her maiden name of Carrington, is hereby legally divorced and free to determine her own future without constraint. The finality of the declaration brought tears to Rose's eyes. She felt Nicholas's steady presence beside her, his hand gently squeezing hers as the judge completed the formalities. Outside the courthouse, well-wishers surrounded them, offering congratulations on both the divorce and the engagement that had been announced the previous day. Nettie Barnes enveloped Rose in a motherly hug, whispering, "Told you he was a good one, didn't I?" Sheriff Miller shook Nicholas's hand firmly. "You're a lucky man, Ryder, and Miss Carrington is a lucky woman. You both deserve some happiness after what you've been through." As the crowd dispersed, Nicholas turned to Rose. "How does it feel to be officially free?" Rose considered the question seriously. "Strange, wonderful, a little frightening," she admitted. "For 5 years I was defined by being Thomas Holloway's wife. Now I'm just me." "There's nothing just about you, Rose Carrington," Nicholas said, his eyes warm with affection. "You're the strongest, most remarkable woman I've ever known." Rose smiled up at him. "And soon I'll be Rose Ryder. That has a nice sound to it, don't you think?" "The best sound in the world," Nicholas agreed. "Speaking of which, when would you like to have the wedding? Judge Parker offered to perform the ceremony before he leaves town tomorrow, but there's no rush if you'd prefer to wait." Rose thought about it. Part of her wanted to seize happiness immediately, while another part felt she should observe a proper period of transition between marriages. But as she looked at Nicholas's face, open and patient, willing to proceed at whatever pace made her comfortable, she knew her answer. "Tomorrow," she decided. "Life on the frontier is too uncertain to delay happiness when it's offered, unless you'd prefer more time to prepare." Nicholas's smile was answer enough. "Tomorrow it is. I'd marry you this minute if it were possible." They agreed to a simple ceremony at Rose's cabin the following morning. Word spread quickly through Bitter Creek's small community, and offers of assistance poured in. Nettie Barnes and several other women volunteered to prepare a wedding feast. The blacksmith's wife, an accomplished seamstress, insisted on making alterations to Rose's blue dress to render it suitable for a bride. The shopkeeper offered to close early so all could attend. That evening, Rose stood on her porch, watching the sunset paint the Wyoming sky in brilliant oranges and pinks. Nicholas had returned to his ranch to make preparations there, insisting that tradition demanded they spend the night before their wedding apart. "It'll be the last night we're separated," he'd promised before riding away, "if I have anything to say about it." Now, alone in her cabin for what would be the final time, Rose reflected on the extraordinary journey that had brought her to this moment. Just months ago, she had been a possession, wagered away by a husband who valued whiskey and cards above her. Tomorrow, she would marry a man who had won her freedom and then stepped aside, allowing her to claim it on her own terms. The irony wasn't lost on her. Thomas Holloway's cruelest act had ultimately led to her greatest happiness. By attempting to trade her away like property, he had inadvertently delivered her to the man who would treat her as a cherished equal. Rose woke before dawn on her wedding day. She bathed in water warmed over the fire, pinned her hair in an elegant style Nettie had taught her, and donned her transformed blue dress. The seamstress had opened the high collar, edging it with delicate white lace, and added pearl buttons down the bodice. The result was both practical and beautiful, much like the life Rose envisioned with Nicholas. By mid-morning, guests began arriving, bringing food and flowers and well wishes. The cabin and yard were transformed with wildflower arrangements and ribbons. A table was set up beneath the cottonwood trees, laden with dishes contributed by nearly every household in Bitter Creek. Judge Parker arrived precisely at noon, dressed in his formal black coat, law books in hand. The small gathering fell silent as he took his position before the cabin door. Rose waited inside, her heart pounding with anticipation rather than fear. When Nettie came to tell her Nicholas had arrived, Rose took a deep breath and stepped onto her porch. Nicholas stood waiting, more handsome than she'd ever seen him in a new black suit, his hair neatly trimmed, his face freshly shaved. But it was his expression that caught her breath, the look of absolute wonder as he saw her, as if he couldn't quite believe his good fortune. "You're beautiful," he said simply when she reached his side. "So are you," she replied with a smile. Judge Parker cleared his throat. "Dearly beloved, we are gathered here today." The ceremony was brief but meaningful. They exchanged simple vows and rings. Nicholas had ridden all the way to Cheyenne to find a delicate gold band for Rose, while she had surprised him with his father's ring, which she'd purchased from the pawn shop where Thomas had sold it years ago. "By the authority vested in me by the territory of Wyoming, I now pronounce you husband and wife," Judge Parker declared. "Mr. Ryder, you may kiss your bride." Nicholas took Rose's face in his hands with exquisite gentleness. "I love you," he whispered for her alone before kissing her with a tenderness that brought tears to her eyes. The celebration lasted well into the evening, with music provided by a fiddler from town and dancing on the packed earth before the cabin. As dusk fell, lanterns were lit, casting a golden glow over the festivities. "Mrs. Ryder," Nicholas murmured as they swayed together to a slow melody, "are you happy?" Rose looked up at her husband. How strange and wonderful to use that word with joy rather than resignation. "Happier than I ever imagined possible," she answered honestly. "And you?" "I feel like I've been given a second chance at life," Nicholas said, his arms tightening around her waist. "I promise you, Rose, I'll never take that for granted." As the evening deepened, guests began to depart, offering final congratulations. Eventually, only Nicholas and Rose remained, standing together on the porch of the cabin that had represented her independence and now symbolized their shared future. "Will you miss it?" Nicholas asked, following her gaze around the small homestead she'd worked so hard to improve. "We can stay here if you prefer. The Lazy R is larger, but this place is special to you." Rose considered the question. "This cabin gave me back my sense of self," she acknowledged. "But home isn't just a place, it's the people who share it. I'd like to move to the ranch if that's all right with you. We can use this place when we need time away, or perhaps offer it to someone else who needs a fresh start someday." Nicholas nodded, understanding the sentiment. "The Lazy R is ours now together. Whatever changes we make, we'll make as partners." Rose turned in his arms, facing him fully. "I like the sound of that, partners." "In all things," Nicholas promised, lowering his head to kiss her again, this time with a deepening passion that spoke of the night ahead. As they crossed the threshold into the cabin, now husband and wife, Rose felt the final shadows of her past recede. Thomas Holloway had sought to diminish her through his final, humiliating wager, but instead had unknowingly set her on the path to genuine love and partnership. Some might call it luck or coincidence that Nicholas Ryder had been at that poker table on that fateful night. But as Rose looked into the eyes of the man who had won her freedom and then her heart, she preferred to think of it as destiny, the universe's way of balancing accounts, transforming one man's cruelty into another man's opportunity for kindness, and a woman's degradation into her ultimate triumph. The years that followed brought challenges and joys in equal measure, as life on the Wyoming frontier demanded resilience and adaptability. The Lazy R prospered under Nicholas and Rose's joint management. Rose applied her gardening skills on a larger scale, establishing an orchard and extensive vegetable gardens that became known throughout the region. Nicholas expanded the cattle operation, breeding stock that withstood the harsh Wyoming winters better than most. 2 years after their wedding, Rose gave birth to a son they named Samuel, after Nicholas's father. A daughter, Elizabeth, followed 18 months later. Both children grew strong and independent, inheriting their mother's determination and their father's quiet dignity. Thomas Holloway never returned to Bitter Creek, though occasional rumors drifted back about his exploits in California and later in Alaska during the gold rush. When news eventually reached them of his death in a Klondike saloon brawl, Rose felt nothing but a distant pity for the man who had once held such power over her life. The cabin where Rose had first tasted independence became a shelter for others in need. Over the years, it housed several women escaping difficult situations, each staying until they found their footing and moved on to build new lives. Nicholas and Rose never charged rent, asking only that the occupants maintain the property and perhaps, when they were able, extend similar kindness to someone else in need. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Nicholas surprised Rose with a journey to California, fulfilling her long-held wish to see the ocean. Standing on a cliff above the Pacific, watching the endless waves crash against the shore, Rose felt a profound sense of completion. "It's even more magnificent than I imagined," she said, leaning against Nicholas's solid warmth. "Worth waiting for?" he asked, his arm secure around her waist. Rose smiled up at him, the wind tugging at her hair, now streaked with the occasional silver strand. "The best things always are." As they watched the sunset paint the water with gold, Rose reflected on the strange twist of fate that had brought them together, how a game of cards and a desperate wager had led to a life richer than either of them could have envisioned alone. "What are you thinking?" Nicholas asked, seeing her thoughtful expression. "That sometimes the worst moments of our lives can lead us to the best," Rose replied. "If Thomas hadn't wagered me that night, we might never have found each other." Nicholas considered this. "Perhaps, or perhaps we would have met some other way." "I like to think some people are meant to find each other, no matter what path they take." "A romantic notion for a practical cowboy," Rose teased gently. "You've changed me," Nicholas admitted with a smile, "and I'm grateful for it every day." As the last light faded from the sky, they turned back toward their lodgings, hand in hand. They had come a long way from that saloon in Bitter Creek, a journey measured not just in miles but in healing, growth, and love freely given and received. In the end, Rose reflected, that was the true value of freedom, not just the absence of constraint, but the presence of choice. The choice to build rather than destroy. The choice to love without fear. The choice to see in another person not what they could provide, but who they truly were. Thomas Holloway had traded her for whiskey and cards, but in doing so, had unwittingly given her the greatest gift of all, the opportunity to discover her own worth. And Nicholas Ryder, the cowboy who had won that fateful hand, had offered her the respect she deserved, along with a love that continued to deepen with each passing year. It was, Rose decided as she walked beside her husband beneath the California stars, a fair trade after all.